Oh my God.
Went up, and all I'll say is when that teacher came to me at the end of that school day and said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" You know, we all have that moment of like, oh no, what happened? And she said, "You would have been beyond proud of your son if you could have seen how he handled himself today." And there wasn't like a dry little eye in the classroom.
I haven't even read it, and I'm like, your dream is to become a mom. My dream is to help you get there. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through domestic adoption and an adoption consultant for over a decade. I'll be your guide, along with other adoption professionals and members of the adoption constellation, walking you step by step down this beautiful and complex path of adopting your baby. When I was going through the adoption process, I had no idea what I was doing, what I needed to know, or more importantly, who to trust. Well, after helping hundreds and hundreds of families grow through the beauty and complexity of adoption, I've learned more than a thing or two, and let me tell you, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This isn't just another podcast sharing adoption stories, but it's for you if you're genuinely committed to diving in with an open heart, eager to learn everything there is to know about adopting a baby so that you can show up for yourself and your child in the best way possible. This podcast is for you if you're ready to put your newfound knowledge into action. Adoption isn't for the weak of heart, and it certainly isn't done when your baby gets placed in your arms. If that's what you think, I'm afraid you're living in La La Land. My promise to you is to keep it real if you promise to keep digging. We'll acknowledge the hard, and we'll also celebrate the joy that is adoption. You ready? Let's do this. Francine Apy, a mom through the blessing of adoption 3 times, has dedicated her life to making adoption a mainstream conversation. As the founder of SoulFilling, she brings adoption into the heart of our homes, workplaces, and schools. With a background in HR, positive psychology, and a profound personal connection to adoption, Francine offers coaching, writing, and public speaking services that blend her professional expertise with her lived experiences. Join us as we delve into her journey, discuss her new book, Brianna's Brave Day at School, and learn about her course at Schenectady County Community College. Francine is passionate about sharing adoption stories when things go right and fostering a community where these stories are celebrated. Plus, find out what she leaves us in suspense about. This conversation flowed in such a surprising way. I hope you love it as much as I did. Welcome to the show, Francine. Listen in to my conversation with Francine Apy. You originally started your career in HR. So what sparked you to start your company, SoulFilling?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I just love what you're doing in the adoption community. So thank you, first off, for that. So yes, my background is in HR leadership for about 25 years, and I loved it. And I retired at on the younger side of that career and took some time off. I have a young family. We've been blessed with 3 children through adoption, and now they're 23, 20 this week.
Wow.
And 18. And, I really kind of sat with it a little while after, I retired and took some time and really reflected on, how do I want to spend the next chapters of my life? And long story short is a dear friend of mine who coincidentally happens to be adopted. It was her birthday in October, about a year and a half or so ago. And I texted her happy birthday. And she said, "Thank you, my soul-filling friend, Fran." And I said, "Soul-filling?" I said, that's right away. I'm like, that's a beautiful word. You hear fulfilling, you hear soul-fill. But there was this element, and I still get a little goosebumps when I say it.
I have goosebumps.
Of this continuum, because it's so filling, it's ongoing, it's flowing, it's continuing, it's not ending. And so to be completely honest, I thought I was going to start a greeting card company with it. It was going to be SoulFilling greetings, and I love photography and pictures of animals and nature, and of course my family. And anyway, I thought I was going to be a greeting card company, and I was going to challenge people of what fills your soul. And have a soul-filling birthday. So that day I made her about 10 cards, and they all were soul-filling related. And honestly, I sat with that for, some time. I created some cards. I sold some cards. I prayed over it. I'm a big person of faith. And all of a sudden I was like, Fran, what fills your soul? Like, really, at the end of the day, what gets you up in the morning? What is like the end all and be all? And it's my children. It's my children. It's my birth families. It's the whole incredible process adoption journey that I've been on with my family. And I thought to myself, how can I make an impact in the adoption community, and using the word soul-filling? So I did all the things. I Googled how to start a business and I created an LLC. And today is SoulFilling's first birthday. So this is the official day that my LLC was created, that I created my logo, that I had my logo copywritten. I created my interpretation of the adoption symbol in the products that I have. And it just really took off from there. And what I was trying to do, I didn't even really have to try, I kind of evolved in what skills did I have in my career that could potentially transfer over into the adoption community? And one of the things, my kids are a little bit older, and I know so much has changed within the adoption experience since my kids were born. But one of the things I didn't find a lot of is like an adoption coach, or even therapists that we talked with. I wasn't able to find a lot of therapists who were trained in how to work with and counsel people, children and families that have adoption in their story. And so I thought, I love coaching. I love coaching in my career. I jumped into an intensive coaching course, and at the end of it, the woman running it, who's amazing, Valerie Burton out of Peachtree City, Georgia, the CAP Institute, great people, great person. Clearly, you're an adoption coach. You're an adoptive parent coach who can kind of be that, as we call, lived experience of adoption.
Oh, I love that somebody else, like a couple people in your story, saw in you clearly what you should be doing. And that's so beautiful, because how affirming.
It was like the light bulbs went off, And I was like, okay, all right, because I was like, and I could change certainly, but I don't have any intentions of getting my master's in social work. And I know the areas that I feel comfortable and confident in terms of coaching in the adoption, what my space is that I could actually help somebody or coach somebody. But I also know what I'm not and what I'm not capable of, and when you need to reach out and build your team out further. So it was really a nice moment for me to be like, I could just really do what I know, if you will, or practice what I know, or share what I know, without a lot of extra, lift in terms of having to reinvent myself one more time.
That's so great. And I do want to shout out how beautiful your logo is. I think, did you say your daughter designed that for you, or your daughter-in-law?
No, that was a dear friend of mine, and also she's in the marketing field. I worked with her in the past, but I think the one you're referring to is the one that's behind my desk that I don't have here right now because I'm in a different office space. But my son's girlfriend, she handmade all of her Christmas gifts this year, and she hand painted the logo as my Christmas gift that I framed and have it in my office. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.
I designed the actual, it first started as the pendant, is what I designed first, my interpretation of the adoption pendant. And then I knew I wanted that pendant as part of my logo with SoulFilling.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So actually, let's just throw it out right now. What's your website so people can, one, buy the pendant if they want, because it's so beautiful, and two, just find out more about SoulFilling?
Sure. So it's soulfillingadoption.com. So SoulFilling is SULFILLING adoption.com.
Awesome. So I hope you will go check her out. I think I'm going to be getting that pendant too. I love it.
Yay.
So you adopted all three of your children.
Yes.
Do you only have 3 children?
I do.
Okay. And all 3 were adopted. Yes. I'm curious, what were some of the similarities? What were some of the differences and maybe unexpected challenges of each of your adoption journeys? Because that's a lot of adoption journeys.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Tell me.
You know, I just can't express enough just how fortunate we were, I'm hesitant a little bit because I love this question because it's my most favorite stories to tell, but I also don't want to do it in such a way to say adoption is just so easy. All you need to do is fill out a profile and send it far and wide and sit back and wait for the phone to ring. And then the phone rings and everything is, just happens according to textbook. But in our situation, it kind of just happened that way. And again, I get a little emotional sometimes about it. I am a person of faith. I never doubted even when I was going through infertility, we were still always, my husband and I from the beginning wanted to adopt our children, adopt a child, we thought. So even during infertility and even before we ever knew it wasn't an option for me to give birth to a child, adoption was always on our heart. And adoption was just something we both wanted to do. And so when I was going through infertility and I knew how long I was going to do that for, it was the end of my treatments and my doctor cried. And I was like, Dr. John, why are you crying? He's like, I don't understand. Women come into me filled with such hope and optimism that I'm going to be the one to help them create their family. And I can only help a very small percentage of those people to conceive and to go to full term. And most people leave here very angry and bitter, and you're not. Why aren't you angry and bitter? I said, because God has another plan for me. And this just isn't the plan for me to become a mom. It just isn't. And that was October. And in November, we got the phone call from my first son's birth mother.
Okay. First of all, let's back up for a second because I have tears in my eyes when you said that and chills throughout my whole body. That whole conversation is so beautiful. And I remember something similar for me. I had been on like a 3-year journey. I did it, 32 inseminations, and then I stopped, and then I was going to go IVF. And then I had this 1.5 hour long drive back to my house after seeing this new doctor that I was thinking of doing IVF with. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And then I stopped crying and I breathed this sigh of relief. And I just remember this feeling of a ton of bricks falling off my shoulders. And that's when I was like, okay, I was never supposed to be pregnant. I was always supposed to adopt. This is my journey. So here we go.
Here we go.
And I never looked back. Now, do I still sometimes grieve that? Yeah, because I think it's really normal. Every woman thinks about, well, what's your biological child going to look like? What's being pregnant going to feel like? And I don't know if you feel that. And I still sometimes when I talk about it, get this twinge of sadness, and I would never do it differently.
Yeah.
If I could do it all over again. So I love
100%,
that.
100%. Mm-hmm. And for me, I wanted to be a mom for as long as I can remember. Like I always wanted a career and I knew I was going to go to college and do some other things. But mom was front and center. I mean, I started babysitting when I was 10 years old. It was instinctually, I'm the youngest of 4 girls. It was instinctually going to be a mom. So for me, it just was not even an option. in my thought process,
Right.
that I was not going to be a mom. And that was always there. And, you know, I'd be remiss to say, just to mention that my roommate from college, mother, had always prayed the rosary, and I had never prayed the rosary in my life. You know, I'm a person of faith, and I believe there's a bigger being there that's supporting us and with us. And as God is my witness, she gave me a rosary bead, and she's like, just pray, you know, the rosary. And that was October. And by the middle of October is when I, you know, realized that I got the call and that I had the meeting with the doctor. And I was just like, okay, all right, here we go. This is my journey. And it was that surrender, that feeling of, you know, as much as we think we're in control of things, and not to say there were days, you go by Becca, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or Rebecca, that you're sad and you're disappointed and you're drained, and it can be exhausting and it can be confusing. But then you have those moments of lightness and of acceptance and of surrender and believing that there's a greater good, something bigger is going on, bigger than what you can imagine. And as my stories go, my son was born in December, so I had to act pretty quickly. He was going to be induced, so he was born in December, and my first birth mother invited me into the delivery room, so I cut the cord, and I was in the delivery room with her, and she will be forever. All of my birth mothers will be forever my heroes. And she just was beyond gracious. And I don't ever remember a time in my life that I was happier than those days. I mean, I think I just walked around with a smile pasted on my face that I'm a mom, and that I could have never, ever imagined it that way in the earlier years of my life, just happening that way. And so that was December, and basically all I did was I created a profile, and I took that profile and I sent it far and wide. I sent it to everybody on my card list that I have. I sent it to every high school, nurse's office, hospitals, social work offices, anywhere I could think of, got my profile in the mail the old fashioned way, because this is now 2000, right? There was no like emailing big attachments, I guess, but I didn't. So my pictures, and it was my story, and it was just like, this is who we are, and this is my journey, and I'd be honored if you would give me the opportunity to speak to you, birth mother.
Wow. Did you do that for all three?
Yes, I did that for all three. And so for the first one, and then what we did is we added a separate phone line. At the time, we had a landline. We added landlines. We added a separate phone line that had a different ring to it when it rang.
Yeah.
So I knew the phone's ringing, get the phone. And then when it got closer to the time of delivery, I did that quick disposable cell phone and added that number to it. But yeah, so then it was about 2 years after our son was about 2, and I did it again. I created the profile, and I created this little postcard I added to it. It was an apple tree, and it said, help us complete our family tree. And I sent that far and wide. And I was on my way actually to go to say the rosary, actually, and the adoption line rang. And the woman on the other end said, hi, I'm calling to help you complete your family tree. And it was my birth mother's mother. So my birth mother's mother calling me and said, I just saw your postcard and I just had to call. And she shared with me their situation. Would you be interested in meeting with us? And I said, of course. And the rest is history. So that was a different journey, because that was, we had about 7 months notice. So I went back and forth from where I was living, and she invited me to all of her weekly appointments, bi-weekly, and then weekly appointments. And then again, invited me to be in the delivery room with her and her mom and myself. And it was incredible.
And what about the third?
And the third actually was different, because I didn't do the postcard and the profile because we really thought our family was done. We were blessed. We have 2 children. And my sister called me one day, and we were in the process of moving. And she said, I think I have another baby for you to adopt. I'm like, and I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but I said, was I looking? Was I looking?
Oh my gosh.
Was I looking? And she's like, so basically, the long story short, she was getting her hair done, and the woman came into the salon that puts the products on the shelf, and she just seemed out of sorts and not her friendly self. So the owner of the salon who's doing my sister's hair said, hey, what's going on? You don't look like yourself. And she said, gosh, dear friends of our family just moved to the area, and they have this big project company that they're building, and they just found out that their daughter is pregnant, and she's made the choice that adoption is the choice for her and her child, but they don't even know where to begin. Well, not knowing that the person in the seat was my sister, who adopted her 2 children, because there was a lot of adoption in our family. And my sister said, I don't mean to interrupt, but have you told that story to anybody else yet? And she's like, well, not yet, because I literally just found out. And she's like, do you mind if I just call my sister and ask her if, right? So my husband was like, Fran, what are we going to do? And I said, you know how so many people we've talked to over the years will say, we weren't even trying to get pregnant, and we got pregnant just like that. And I was always very happy for them, but I knew I would never experience. I said, honey, this is me waking up pregnant. From the adoption perspective, we weren't even looking, right? We weren't even, what is the expression? Life is busy. Life is what happens when you're busy making plans. We were in the middle of relocating across the state. Wow. I mean, literally, like within days of moving, we had more on our plate, you know, than we needed at the moment. And it was September, and my birthday is September 17th. And I said to my husband, all I want for my birthday is to meet the birth mother, because that's the week she was available. And he said, and where do you think this is going to go? I said, I don't know, but all I want to do is meet her. And we did. 2 days later, it was the 15th. 2 days later, we met her in a room with her attorney and her mom. And at the end of the conversation, she said, will you be the mother of the child I'm carrying?
Did you look at your husband, or did you just answer?
I said, absolutely.
What did your husband say?
And
or did he walk out of the room?
No, he was overjoyed. He's like, I don't know. How do you do that? How do you know? Like what, you know? Because the biggest thing for me is I wanted them to know that in our adoption at that time, I didn't have the opportunity to have open adoption conversations with everybody, and all of my children. My children knew they were adopted, but I wasn't sure of what their story was going to look like going forward for an open adoption, as referred to an open adoption. So as Mama Bear, I kind of was protecting my 2 children that I had. And if my third birth mother said, I want an open adoption, I want to be together every holiday or whatever, I don't know if that would have been the right match for me at that time, right? Now you have to remember, this is the early 2000s, right? Today, I may think differently about that, but at the time, it wasn't. So at that time, she said, I would be open to whatever you're doing for your other 2 children. I would be open to continue with that. And I said, and I want you to know, they will know from the minute they are born that they were adopted. They will hear the word adoption. They will know their story, and I will be age appropriate with them every step of the way. So it wasn't about not wanting my children to know about their birth families. It was about me not knowing exactly how those stories were going to play out for my kids. And I just wanted to protect them in their earlier years in life. And then as they got older, they could make those decisions, you know, collectively with us and with their birth family, should they choose.
So they knew they were adopted.
Yes.
But you didn't have, wait, explain that again. So
we didn't have open adoption for the first 2 children. There wasn't an open adoption in that we're going to get together every holiday and birthday. What we agreed to were pictures and letters through the attorneys.
Got it.
Twice a year.
Because
and that's what was agreed upon. That's what was agreed upon early on. And then we left it as, let's see how it goes and know that our children will always know of you and know, but let's see where your journey takes you. Let's see where our journey takes us.
Yeah.
And when the time is right, we will assess this, but let's keep in communication. And we did pictures and letters 2 to 3 times a year, like Christmas time and birthdays. And then it became very apparent that 2 of my children were very interested in meeting their birth mothers, and we continued down that path for them. And to this day, they have those connections and made those connections. But again, I did it in such a way that I wanted to respect the wishes of the birth mothers, and I wanted to respect my children, and I wanted it to go as naturally as possible, as they continued on their journey.
Wow. So okay, that's quite a story. And we're like 5 minutes in, okay, maybe 15, but I've already gotten goosebumps throughout my body at least 3 times. But there were a couple things that you said throughout that kind of ring true throughout all 3. One is letting go of control. And I'm so happy that you brought that up, because I often tell my families, the minute you can let go of control, that's when the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
100%. Right?
And not to say that's easy.
No, especially because most of us are type A that are going through this process, right? We're organized. We like things that we like.
Problem solvers.
Yeah. And and you can be for the first half of your journey when you're getting together your home study and your profile and signing up where you want to, and then you have to let go. And that's where people really struggle, because they want to continue controlling it. But as soon, case in point, as soon as you can kind of let go and believe in that higher power, right? Which goes into the second piece of it. That's when the magic happens. And you said you're a woman of faith. And so you would pray, and we have a 4-step process called the Adoption Roadmap. How interesting that this podcast is called the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. And for every step that we guide our families through, there is a mindset piece for them to do, which I equate to praying if you want to pray, meditating if you want to meditate. So I think that mindset piece is so important too. And I'd probably guess that 85% of the people blow that off because they think, I'm not into it.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, and I love that you incorporate that, because it's so important to help in stress management of the process, right? Because you can't have a full breath in meditation and be stressed at the same time. And this is one of the most stressful times in your life, if growing a family is something you want to do and it's not happening on your plan, on your agenda. So just bringing that awareness to people, I think, is brilliant on your part, Rebecca, because that is so critical. And it's usually, what do they say in the meditation work? Because I do have a meditation practice and a yoga practice as well. And the power of the breath, there's, the gurus say, when we, not to get too yogi, but when the gurus say the people that can't sit and meditate, those are the ones that need to even meditate more, that they say that they don't need it and that they're not capable of being still. And I love it when people just say, sit for 5 minutes, allow yourself 5 minutes, and then add on 1 minute at a time, because it's powerful.
It is
and
powerful.
When that happens, that's when the emotion comes, right? The release a lot of times. And then you're able to say, okay, not on my agenda.
Yeah.
There's a bigger agenda out there.
So much happens when you can do that, when you can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I'm at a place in my life, in my business, where I know I need to get back to that ritual and that practice, which I did for so long, and it really resulted in amazing things for me. And then for some reason I got out of the habit, and it's, you know, it's hard to get back into a habit once you stop. So get in the habit and keep it going. Beautiful things will happen in your world.
Same. And not to say that I get it right every week and every day and every time 100%. No, but I love what my yoga teacher always says. And it's just begin again. You stopped. You took longer than you wanted to. You just begin again. You just begin again. You know, whatever that is, to be able to continue on the journey and try to not, whatever you can, to keep the in perspective and to manage the stress of it all, because it can be stressful. So that's one tool. So
I hope this is okay. I want to call you out on something, only because the nature of this podcast is to educate and to use the right language and all of that. And one of the things I've heard you say, and I'm guilty of it too, because I used to do it all the time until I was called out on it. No, it's okay. And I'm so glad that you said this, because it's very common. You keep referring to the birth moms as your birth moms, right? I used to do that all the time too. And someone's like, it's not your birth mom.
Oh, it's my children's birth
It's
mom.
Your child's birth mom. Oh. And it's and yet I feel like, oh, okay, yes, I get that. One, why is that an issue? That's one question. Two, like, I feel like she's mine, because like, I feel like so entwined with her, and yet she's not. And that's a thing for some people. So
I love that you brought that. I haven't heard that yet, because I was corrected on, because I am a little older and I had my kids, you know, and things have evolved.
Oh, so much.
The language. And I try so hard, even in my children's book, at the end of my children's book I wrote, I put adoption language in there. But I haven't heard this one, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for being open to it.
So my son's birth mom.
Yes. Again, something I learned too, because I used to say that too. And
I had to re-aid there. Now I have to rewrite to wire it properly in my brain. Thank you.
Yeah, and you're right. Things have evolved so much. I mean, just think of the world we live in, right? The language and nuances and new things keep evolving. And it's so hard, because I can't tell you how many times I've said the wrong thing about something new that's popped up in the world, like a new movement or whatever. And I've said the wrong thing, and I've been, you know, my hand has been slapped, and that's okay. I'm glad for it in the end. But language is so nuanced in adoption, and it's such a serious thing on so many levels. And I also want to say that when you adopted and when I adopted, pictures and letters through the agency were the standard. That was the norm for open adoptions. So I wanted to bring that up. It has, again, evolved, and now the norm is becoming yearly visits. I'd say it still is texting and direct calls, but it's really moving into yearly visits more and more.
Yes, 100%.
Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. So one of the things that we highlight with families like yours, with adoption in their family, because you mentioned your sister adopted, and I don't know where else it falls in your family, maybe you can talk about that, is that the expectant mom's child won't be the only one in their family touched by, in their new family. The child won't be the only one touched by adoption, that there'll be others like them. So in that vein, you have multiple nieces and nephews who are adopted. Do your children and their cousins ever talk about adoption with each other? And do you think having them in your family brought comfort to your children?
You know, I think so, right? I mean, it's funny. I say it when I shrug my shoulders a little bit because it's all that they know. It was their norm, right? So there's 11 grandchildren in our family, 8 of which are adopted. So
Wow.
there's 4 girls, 3 of us have been unable to conceive and give birth to a child. So my oldest sister had 3 girls right away, very close in age, but my children are a bit younger than my sister's kids. So they weren't like all the same age. The first 5, well, there's 11. So how many? 3, 6, 7, 8. So the first 8, sorry, were very close in age. Like literally there were 8 grandchildren in like a 3-year period because my one sister adopted 2 right away, 4 months apart. And then a third. So they were like, we went from no grandchildren to 8. And then everyone wanted to know, are Fran and Ray coming to the party? Are Fran and Ray coming to Christmas? What time are Fran and Ray getting here? Because we were the only ones without children. So they're like, when are Aunt Fran and Uncle Aunt Fran and Uncle Ray coming? So then there was a bit of a gap. And then we had our kids. So my kids are that much younger, about 5 years younger, the oldest, and then more onward. But, yeah, it was cute. At one point, my sister, who gave birth to her children, said to her, sometimes I wish I was adopted because their stories are so much more interesting than ours. We're just born from you. And that's really the way it was. It was like everyone that we knew in our family knew of the adoptions, knew of the stories. Everyone that we knew in our friendships and our extended family. It was just part of our story. And it was never something that we didn't want to talk about or didn't. Certainly there were moments that, like anyone, I don't want to talk about this or that, but it was always just the way that it was. So there was, I guess that's all I can say, but I have to, acknowledge that it did give this sense of like, this is how families come together. And we are a big example of that. And that's our story,
I'm curious if, that's a lot of, it's a lot of trauma. It's a lot of stories about identity and where someone comes from. And I don't know how intimately everybody knows everybody else's story, but I'm wondering if that has ever become a problem for anybody.
It hasn't. I mean, they've all met their birth families. I'll never say, Rebecca, whether you adopted your children or not, we all have to go through peaks and valleys of our story, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has to go through adolescence. Everybody has to go through periods of not understanding themselves or being frustrated with their siblings or frustrated at school or whatever it can be, right? And I always wanted my children to know that they could talk about whatever they needed to talk about, that they could share what they ever needed to share about. Mm-hmm. But I never wanted them to blame adoption as something that was against them, if that makes sense. I never wanted them to have that as an excuse to be angry or to be misunderstood or to blame something that they don't like about themselves because it was related somehow to adoption.
So how do you think you did that?
I basically, accountability, in my opinion, is accountability. Like, I think anything, like if there's divorce in somebody's story or whatever could be a difficult piece of a story, it can be so easy to just let kids kind of manipulate, for lack of a better word, or use that as a crutch or a complaint for a behavior that isn't okay or whatever. But for me, it was about accountability, and it was about realizing, I notice you're upset. I know that you're frustrated. Let's figure that out, talk that through. If you're not ready to talk that through, that's perfectly fine now. But what's going on right now needs needs some work, right? Needs
Yeah.
some understanding. And I never, ever wanted them to look at their story in a way that made them feel that it was anything but the way it was supposed to go. You know?
Yeah. That's so interesting. I've never heard anyone say it like that. And it's beautiful. And you talk about amplifying stories of adoption when things go right.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that concept, because I think that's kind of what you're alluding to a little bit, but tell me a little bit more about that concept.
Yeah, one of the pieces as I've evolved over the last year was SoulFilling. And I, really what came to mind, one of the things that came to mind is I wish media and I wish television and magazine articles and newspaper articles and movies and shows just talked more about adoption when things just go right. And I'm not saying Pollyanna, everything is beautiful, everything is perfect, my life is, no, I'm talking about when things just go right. Can we talk about those stories more? When the birth mother acknowledges that this really was the right answer still for me today, all these years later. And this is why. Can we bring those stories to the forefront? When the adoptee says, I'm at peace with my story and I'm at peace with where I am in my life and where this journey has taken me. And not to say, and I always want to follow up with, not to say that we push down and we ignore and we pretend when we're not sad or angry or wishing we knew something that we can't get the answer to. But that's when I say stop. And who do you need to bring into your team, to bring into your world, to get you through to a better place in that area? Because if you don't resolve those things are going to win. Those things that bring you down, make you sad, make you frustrated, have that ability to spiral down and take you to a place that, is that where you want to live the rest of your life? In this space of feeling frustrated and disappointed and sad? So get those people on your team to help you through that process. And when you get to the other side, amplify that too. Amplify that, how you got to there. Because find me anybody at the end of their journey, God willing, if you live to be 80, 85, 90, that looks at their life and say, I loved every chapter of my story. And every chapter of my story and every character that came into my story was perfect. And I am an optimist, I will say that. But at the end of the day, we all have the choice. We were all given free will. We all have the choice to wake up every day and decide, I can stay stuck in this anger, or I can move to the other side. And that's your choice.
So true.
Right?
It's so good. Yeah.
I believe it in all my heart. And I feel sometimes that when we get stuck in that place, it's really hard for us to get out of it sometimes ourselves. And I think as parents, as you watch your children, we have to just be in tune to that, because it gets so easy just to be like, I don't want to talk about it, and push it away. And every time we push it down, it grows bigger and bigger. And so somehow bringing that to light.
I mean, with anything in life, right? And the first thing when we were starting to talk about when things go right, the first thing that came to mind is that doesn't get the ratings in the media, right? Unfortunately. And there are so many of those beautiful stories. And mostly what we are reading online are the opposite. So I do love that's, you're someone that's coming in and focusing on the positive. And I also love that you are talking about working through your issues, your trauma, whatever's coming up for you. One of the things I remember hearing many years ago from a panel of adoptees is one adoptee saying that the person that really had the biggest impact in her life was her therapist, and that she believes that no adoptee should not have a therapist in their life. And
100%. And like I said, I'm not exaggerating. Every time You know, we moved a couple times, all within the same state. But every time we moved, found a new pediatrician, we found a new dentist. I like the chiropractor. We found a new
Yeah.
chiropractor. And then I tried to find, as I told my kids, a talking doctor. And I always wanted them to meet this therapist or counselor before an issue came up. So they're like, Mom, I don't have anything. I'll never forget my youngest. He was like 4 years old. And he said, Mom, I don't have anything to talk to them about. I said, that's fine. You're just meeting them. So then sometime while we're living here, if something comes up, then we don't have to go find somebody. We already have somebody. We've established a relationship and we're going to just talk about nothing. And then he's like, oh, I just realized I have something I want to talk to them about. I said, awesome. Do you want to share that? Do you want to share it? And he goes, oh, I'll share it with you. Sometimes I just wish you didn't pick out my pajamas and put them on my bed while I was taking a bath. Sometimes I want to pick out my own pajamas. So I'm going to talk to them about it. I said,
whatever it is.
I said, you talk to them about that. And I truly believe that, even though I found it difficult for me to find somebody that had adoption experience, at least it was somebody who had more skills than I did, and more skills beyond a pediatrician or a school teacher or the other people, coach in their world, that they knew there was this other entity of the world known as counselors and therapists who are talking doctors who help you through things.
I swear I did not plant this conversation, but one of the things that, again, we talk about with all of our new families is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you are going to wish you had an adoption competent therapist tucked in your back pocket, because you will need them. And so we give them a list of places to call, and most of them are like, we're fine. You know, what do we need someone for? So what we started to do, because I realized nobody was calling, like 1%, you know, it's like it probably the 1% who also did the mindset piece. It goes hand in hand. What we started to do was have monthly circle of support calls with some adoption competent therapists who lead the conversation. And the point was not to have a therapy session, although it sometimes becomes that, but to come on for somebody to say, here are some things that people come to us for when they're going through the process or right after the process. And suddenly people are like, oh, yeah, I'm struggling with that. But they weren't thinking about that. So now they have met someone, now they can call someone or just hop on the next month, you know, whatever it is that they need. So I'm just so glad that we're talking about this. Let's talk a little bit about your books.
Oh, sure. So
you're a two-time author.
Well, I'm not a two-time, a one-time author, but I was involved. I published my mom's book. I self-published my mom's life story. So long story short, that's what gave me, kind of opened up the door for me to move forward with my children's adoption theme book. But my mom has an incredible life story. Born in Ukraine, World War II survivor, lived in foster care throughout Europe, came to this country as a little girl, and talk about resilient, and talk about she was separated from her family at 5 years old and never saw them again until I was born in 1968, when she was right after she gave birth to me.
Was she Jewish or no?
No, she's Ukrainian.
Yeah, because usually these stories of
Ukrainian Catholic,
right, Ukrainian Catholic,
Ukrainian Catholic, yeah. So she is one of the most inspirational people I know in my whole life. My sisters and I, whenever we needed an A in a class, we'd say, "Oh, just write Mom's story." Philosophy or history or religion or English. Anyway, in 2016, I had the opportunity to meet a professor, and she teaches Russian and Ukrainian history. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I found the person to write Mom's story, to give it justice, to really paint the backdrop of what was going on in Europe, right, during World War II. And so she wrote the story in 2016 and interviewed my mom and weaved in my mom's story and gave the whole backdrop of World War II. And I made 50 copies and I did a surprise party for my mom. And the check mark was marked. We wrote Mom's story, and it's out there for the family.
Beautiful.
And then the unfortunate situation of Ukraine happened again in 2023. And I went back to my friend who wrote the story, Kate Greeny, and I said, Kate, I think there's more chapters that need to be written here that could reach a broader audience in Ukraine and maybe give hope for the Ukrainian people right now to share Mom's story. And so she's like, you're absolutely right. So we went back to the drawing board, wrote Mom's story. And at that point, I'm like, we need to self-publish this. So I self-published it. I designed the cover, and I wrote the foreword and the epilogue, and I made it happen and got it on Amazon, and it's taking on a little life of its own.
Oh, nice.
And after I did that, I really loved the experience. And I said, you know what, I want to, part of my mission is to make the conversation of adoption more mainstream at home, work, and school. And one way I can do this with schools is through a children's book. So it's called Brianna's Brave Day at School. It is on Amazon, and as well as on my website and at our local bookstore here. But it is based on an actual event that happened to my son, Matthew. And I just decided my character's name is Brianna, and I didn't call out Matthew in it, but it's actually an actual event that happened to him in elementary school, first grade, that they had reading time. And at the end of the reading time, the teacher said, does anyone want to share what happened in the story they read? And the little girls just stood up, and she said, I just read a story about a little girl who was adopted, and she must have been a really bad baby for her mom not to want her. Ooh. And my shyest of the three's arm went up, and now you have to get the book to see what he said. I'm going to leave you on that.
Oh my God.
Went up, and all I'll say is when that teacher came to me at the end of that school day and said, can I talk to you for a minute? You know, we all have that moment of like, oh no, what happened? And she said, you would have been beyond proud of your son if you could have seen how he handled himself today. And there wasn't like a dry little eye in the classroom.
I haven't even read it. And I'm like, whoa.
And it spiraled into a whole conversation of adoption and how families can come together. So that to me was such an awesome experience. And so I will begin a series. Brianna has lots of things she's going to talk about and places she's going to go, but I bring it to light because it's kind of like you just want to address the elephant in the room a little bit, right? Like so many times, again, my children are older, but people don't know what to say. Most people would say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't know your kids were adopted. Well, don't be sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about, you know? When I would say, oh, my kids, and I often would share like with their coach, with my kids' permission, you know, as they got older and as they were younger, do you mind if I share with your coach that you were adopted? Because sometimes my kids were very open often about sharing their adoption story. And one of my biggest fears was I didn't want somebody to say, oh, stop, you were not. You know, my kids happen to resemble my husband and I, don't ask, but they do. And my biggest fear was for someone to shut them down and say, knock it off, you know, and then they'd have to be like, no, you know. So I often would share with coaches when they were little or teachers to say, and be ready because they may want to share their story. That's all, you know.
Oh, God, I can't wait to read that. And, you know, we often wonder how our kids represent themselves or choose to represent themselves when they're not in our presence. And
right. He was first grade, 7 years old. So, and I just had my first opportunity to read the book to a classroom, to a first grade classroom last week. It was the first, because that's, you know, and I want to donate. So my goal is to donate to as many libraries and schools I can, the book. So when your kiddos in elementary K-5 go on the bookshelf, they have an adoption story available to them, because I don't know how many school libraries or bookstores have that readily available to kids. I don't know. Yeah. But, and it was an incredible moment because after I read the book in this classroom last week, this little girl raised her hand and she said what her name is. She said, my name is X and I was adopted. Boom,
I
right in the
love
front.
that. And for people listening who, I love that you're trying to do that. I recently had an episode that aired on June 19th, a conversation with Allison Olson, who's an adoptee and an author. She also recently published a book about, my best friend was adopted. I can't remember the exact title, but I'll link it in the show notes also, along with Francine's book. I love that you're trying to get those stories out there on the main bookshelves and in schools. What do you think are the most common misconceptions that people have about adoption, and what do you think we can do to dispel those misconceptions? I mean, having books out.
Yeah. So at the end of the book, I do have an adoption facts and like key. So the terminology, just the terminology. Birth mother, the definition. November's National Adoption Month. What is that? Why do we do that? Adoptive mom, the colors of adoption, right? The yellow, pink, and white. Why that we wear a white ribbon during National Adoption Month.
I never knew all this stuff.
The symbol of adoption. So to me, it's educational, but it's just a little lighter, right? So I think if we can bring the conversation to the table in a lighter way, raising families is heavy, can be heavy, whether you adopted your children or not. So can we lighten it up a little bit with some just basic terminology of educating people? So my hope is that because the book is really for ages 4 to 8. So if a mom or a dad or a babysitter is reading the book, we're educating them too on adoption language and kind of how to use terminology instead of saying, is that the real mother? Real mother, is that the birth? So what do they call it? Do your kids know that they're adopted? Like those kinds of things. So my hope is that when we can bring these conversations in casual way, we begin to reduce the stigma of like, oh, we can't talk about that because we don't know what to say. So you don't want to say the wrong thing. So you don't say anything. And sometimes that's the worst thing. So that book is one thing I'm doing. But the other piece that I'm doing to try to reach more of the adult community is a local community college, Schenectady County Community College, asked me to teach a course on the work that I'm trying to do. And that's going to be offered in November during National Adoption Month over Zoom so that we could reach as many people as we can in their continuous ed program. So whether you're in, Arizona or Tennessee or here in New York, you could participate in it. But the course I called is Adoption is a Matter of the Heart. And I just paint the history of adoption and how far it's come and why some of those stigmas are there, that it's no right, wrong, or otherwise 50 plus years ago, that it was more fear-based and we don't want to talk about it. We want to pretend it didn't happen. I don't know what to say, so we're not going to say anything. And just how it's evolved to, yes, I was adopted and it was a choice that somebody made. And this is my journey. And sometimes I want to talk about it and sometimes I don't. But yeah, the center of it in these stories is primarily love. And I have to believe that.
I love it. You're doing all this. And when it does come out, you'll have to share the link with us so that I can share it with
Sure. Listeners. It's on my website and in my newsletter that just launched yesterday. We can include the newsletter link. I'd love that.
Okay, great.
That newsletter link will bring them to all the links of the things that I'm doing and the different places I'm going. And
wonderful. I will put that in there.
Yeah. The only other thing I just wanted to add from being a proactive state within adoption is CASE out of Baltimore, Maryland, the Center for Adoption Support and Education. They do a phenomenal job at training therapists and counselors on the topic of adoption.
Oh, wow.
So, and I believe they're represented in like 30 plus states. So they're based out of Baltimore. They're in Baltimore, Virginia, and one other area down in that area. But they do amazing work. So any donations that I've received, that money specifically goes to their effort to educate therapists and the people that serve the adoption community. So when trauma comes up, when difficult situations come up, that we have more resources, more feet on the street that can support our adoption community. And I don't want anyone to not be able to get the support that they need because they can't find a therapist who's versed in adoption.
Amen. Amen. So, Francine, what's been one of the most rewarding experiences that you've had as an adoption coach? Can you think of one that stands out?
You know, gosh, there's a couple things that come to mind, but more so than a coach in my journey of SoulFilling, and I'm not exaggerating, every single time somebody says, I was in a hotel elevator and I had my SoulFilling sweatshirt on, and the guy, an older gentleman, he's like, SoulFilling, what's that? And I said, oh, it's my mission is adoption, and I'm trying to make the conversation of adoption more mainstream at home, work, and school. And he just looked at me and he's like, that's really cool. So either I get like, that's really cool. And my son was with me, one of my sons, and he goes, were you adopted? And my son was like, yeah. He goes, I don't even know what to say, but this is just really cool. I never heard somebody talk like this. So I love like that it's coming across a little refreshing and kind of like, that's cool. So either I get that or I get, my neighbor is in the process of adoption. Yeah. My doctor that I had a full knee replacement, he was like, had adoption in his story, because he was just saying, what's your post-op like? Where do you work? What do you do? And sometimes, you want to share what you do, and sometimes you don't, just because your time schedule. And for whatever reason, I said, I started this company, and he looked at me and he's like, I have adoption in my story. And I ended up giving him my business card.
Of course. Why not?
Right?
Why not? Yeah. And I think that happens all the time.
All the time. Either they're a neighbor. I mean, when I went to a jewelry store to put my signs for National Adoption Month, she said, oh, my manager is in the process of trying to adopt. And in came a jeweler who was adopted herself, and she just made a custom adoption bracelet for my son for his birthday last week. It's spectacular. He didn't use my interpretation because mine's a little feminine. But in any event, so it's those kinds of things. It's not like I don't know anyone who was adopted, or why would you do this? It's more of like, that's really cool. And I need to connect you with these people because they have adoption in their story.
That's beautiful. So for those considering adoption or just in the early stages, you have any advice for them or insights that you want to share?
Gosh, I have a lot of things. I guess I would say I would go back to one of our conversations and just be open to the miracle. Just keep open to the miracle, because anything that we can formulate in our minds of how we think it should go and what we think we should do and uncertain about how we're going to do it, all those things, it's normal for us to feel those things. And I always say, grab a notebook, write down all those things, put them somewhere, because if you can't articulate it to somebody, the power of writing it down, write it down, and just trust in something bigger than you, whatever that can be, in the possibility of that miracle beyond your wildest imagination.
That is beautiful advice. I love it.
And build your team.
Build your team. Absolutely.
You're never alone, Keep calling and making those phone calls until you find your people that you feel get you, that understand you, and build your team. I
love that. Francine, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. It really went in directions I wasn't expecting. But before we end, I have a small series of rapid fire questions for you.
Oh, no.
Just to throw you off your game a little bit. Take a sip of water, settle into your chair. All right. As it relates to adoption, is there a person or an organization who has really influenced you? If so, I'd love to shout them out.
A person
or organization.
I'd say CASE. I'd shout out CASE. I just feel they're on the path of supporting our community. Center for Adoption, Support, and Education.
Love it. What does your morning routine look like?
Thank you, God, for another day. I am a sunrise person. I love to see the sunrise. And I am a person of meditation. Sometimes it's a minute, sometimes it's 20, but finding that breath. And I do love to write. If I could write 5 things down of what I'm grateful for, how I want the day to go, I have to start it on a positive note.
Me too. Love that. What's your biggest pet peeve?
People who are stuck in not wanting to grow or move beyond where they're at, that they feel that it's a life sentence to be stuck. I don't know a lot of them, but I do find that I love that you use the phrase that you work with hopeful families. You work with hopeful families who want to adopt. And a little pet peeve of mine is, why would you want to live in any other space other than a space of hope?
Yeah. Describe adoption in 3 words.
Love in action.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks to Francine Apy for joining us during that soul-filling discussion of making the conversation about adoption more mainstream. We hope that learning about the beauty and uplifting moments of adoption and how to share those were beneficial to you. As always, thanks for listening to the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Until then, this is Rebecca Gruenspan. Remember, success is a continuous journey. If you find yourself veering off course, just steer back onto the roadmap until you reach your destination. And whatever you do, never lose hope. Hope is that light inside you that will lead you to your dreams. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.